Setting up one of my paintings is a bit like building a film set, but just for one shot only. I get asked a lot why the 1960s and why Americana for my paintings, and one of my favourite films is Superman the movie. When I was a kid, I would fast forward to the bit where it got to Superman, but before that I would always stop at the bit where it was the 1960s and it had the old cars and the old clothes and the hairstyles, and even back then I just loved how it looked, and I think that's it's as simple as that. Hi, my name is Will Rochfort. I'm an oil painter fascinated by the golden age of Hollywood and cinema, and I'm here in the Jackson studio to share a little bit about my process. I've always drawn. I always say it's the only thing I've ever been good at is drawing and painting. So when I was little, I would just spend days and days in just with all my making models out of cardboard and cereal boxes and drawing comic books and copying things off of TV. And then as I went through school and as I went through college, it kind of moved into an interest in the figure and in portraiture. That in turn moved into painting, and I started trying watercolors, and then I moved into acrylics. And then when I was at university, I tried oil painting, and it was kind of a fork in the road, because as soon as I tried it, I thought, this is what I want to do. And there was kind of no going back, really. I always say I get my ideas from movies, which is definitely true. It can be a whole film, it can be just the atmosphere of a film, the look of a film, or it can be one scene, or it can be a little tiny snapshot of a scene. There would just be something that grabs me, and I think, oh, that's it. I'd love to make a painting of that. But also, I think I probably do get my ideas all the time, constantly. So I just almost subconsciously, I'm sort of taking things in. So I might be out with my family, with my kids, and I'll see something and think, oh, that would be a good painting. And I don't write these things down. I don't have a book of ideas, but I've got so many ideas in my head of paintings that I really want to do, and it's just finding the time to do them. But if an idea sticks around, I know it's a good one. Every one of my paintings is different to the last one, but the process that I take to set it up kind of stays the same. I've learned over the years that stage, the prep stage, is so important, and that the more energy I put into that stage, the easier and the better the painting will be further down the line. So it always starts with sketches. Whether it's a commission or it's just a painting, for me, it always starts with some very quick kind of thumbnail sketches, very just quick scribbles. Just if I've got an idea in my head, I'll get it down on paper. I'll slowly develop those sketches just to try and shape the idea, just to try and form it and try and refine it a bit, try and figure out if there's anything I don't need in the composition. Does it need more? Does it need less? I'm usually trying to tell a story in my paintings, so that initial sketch stage, just to try and figure out what's the simplest way to tell this story, that's so important. So I put a lot of time into that. It's quite rare that for the finished painting to differ a lot from my very initial sketch. That very first scribble will often be quite similar to the finished painting. Once I've got that sketch to a point that I'm happy, I begin to organise a photo shoot. And that's where I get in my friends and family to pose for me. I source locations, or I build sets. I've built entire sets for my paintings. I find props. And then I work with my friend Adam, who's a brilliant photographer, to help shoot all of the scenes for my paintings. He knows the lighting that I like, and he makes sure the camera is in focus, which sounds a bit silly, but that's so essential. And it means that I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about the technical side. I can just focus on the important bit, which is talking to people, the people that have come to pose for the painting, and explain to them what the painting is of, how I want them to sit or stand, what I want them to be. Setting up one of my paintings is a bit like building a film set, but just for one shot only. There was a painting I did that was inspired by a film where I saw the astronauts from Apollo 11, when they returned from the moon. They were driven through New York City, and there was a big ticker tape parade. I hired a Cadillac, beautiful old 1960s Cadillac. I found some people that had some horses and came along, and they dressed up in police gear for me. 3 of my friends to sit in the back of the Cadillac as the returning astronauts. We had confetti cannons that we were firing to get all the confetti falling through the air. I could say to someone, pretend there's a car there. And they could do it, and they could do a good job, but when there's a real car there, it you can just see it just brings them to life a little bit. I had a crowd of people, only about 10 people, so I had to kind of repeat them. I had to get them to stand here, take a photo, move them, take another photo, move them, take another photo. So if you look through the painting, you can see the same person does appear quite a few times, but I would literally, I'd paint a moustache on them, or I'd change their hair or something like that. Before the shoot, I found a shot of New York looking down Fifth Avenue that I kind of made sure the angles that we were shooting from on the day were matched the angles in that photo of Fifth Avenue. And then I could combine the two afterwards when I had all the photos and all the references. I used to take the photos and actually had hard copies that I would keep. I've got drawers full of all the photos from my photo shoots. But in the last 6 months, I've been convinced to get an iPad, and it's amazing how you can actually zoom in on the image. Rather than having to print off 5 different versions of the same shot where you're slowly zooming in, I can actually just do it on the screen. I'm a bit behind the times. Another painting that I did was a commission to show the opening night of Peter Pan on stage in 1904. Even in the busiest painting, I try and have everything in it that's just drawing you to the point that I want you to look at. I found a theatre. I built sections of a pirate ship to go on the stage. I built a full-size cannon out of cardboard to go on the stage. My friend made a Captain Hook. I got all my nieces and nephews to pose as the Lost Boys and girls. And the shoot took all day, but it was amazing. And we had the run of all the lights and everything. And by the end of it, I had all these hundreds and hundreds of shots that, again, I could just put together and just combine them. And that was huge. That was probably the biggest photo shoot that I've done for a painting. Because I don't want to work with actual models. There's a naturalism. When it's just my friends and family, that's where I get the results that I'm after. The props for my paintings are so important. It's such a crucial element of every painting that I do. If I can't buy it, find it, or rent it, I'll make it out of cardboard, which is kind of one of my favourite things to do. It's how I spent my childhood making models out of cardboard, and I still do it now. So I have this one. I got this guy here. I did a painting loosely based around the creature from the Black Lagoon, and it was a painting of the actor playing the creature, relaxing between shots. And so I made it. I made the whole thing, and this was the head, and it's just a cardboard tube, ping pong balls for the eyes. I think it's just there to give me the information I need. It's there to make everything just kind of come together a bit more on the day. After the busyness of putting a photo shoot together and the organising and the people and the sketches and all of that, once I've got all that out the way and I'm in my studio, and then I'll combine all those shots into one scene and do a final sketch. And then from there, I start painting. I try to never just jump in. No matter how long I've been doing this for, how many paintings I've done, I try and just take a second, just to stop and take a deep breath and then start painting. Just for a second, because I think as soon as I start a painting thinking I've got this, that's when it's going to go wrong. My first step is to transfer that sketch onto the canvas. And I have 4 main methods that I will use. I'll either freehand it, if I'm feeling brave. I'll use the grid method, which is my favorite. I have something called the invisible grid method. It's basically the grid method, but instead of forming the grid with lines, I do it with dots. And then the final one is I sometimes use my projector, which I know is frowned upon by some people, but I think it's an amazing tool. I never project a photo. I don't think I'd want to do that, but I will happily project my sketch. I've done the work in the sketch, so now I just want to get it onto the canvas so I can just start painting. No matter which method I'm using, I sketch using charcoal. And I use charcoal just because it's quite easy to correct and change. So I do that onto a white canvas, and simply because it's easier to see what you're doing on a white canvas. And then I will seal it with a very, very, very thin coat of a fixative spray. The drawing always rubs away a little bit, but it doesn't matter. It leaves enough for me to work from. So then when it's sealed, over the top, I paint a base colour, a ground of usually a kind of a brown colour. It gives a warmth to the colours over the top. So when I'm doing one of my smaller portraits, I'll definitely go for the red because it gives a warmth to the skin tones. But another reason I'll put this brown or red base coat down is because when I'm painting, I'm quite loose, so I'll miss loads of little tiny bits. And if I'm working on a white canvas, all those little tiny bits of white will shine through really brightly. I did a painting of a truck, and it was a film crew in the back of it, and they were all screaming into the megaphone and filming, and I'm working on a study of my friend Mike, and he was the driver in the driver's seat. But when it comes to the actual painting, it's usually fairly set in stone. I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm trying to achieve. Having said that, I will paint things out. Sometimes it doesn't matter how much planning I do. For whatever reason, when I come to do the actual painting, it just doesn't work. It's just something just isn't flowing quite right. And I have painted out entire figures before because it helps the story and it helps the atmosphere or the feeling of the painting. If it's going to help the painting, then it's gone, and I'll paint it out, or I'll repaint it and start it again. I think that's quite important, to be able to do that, to be able to accept that sometimes it doesn't go well. There's always a stage with every painting where it doesn't look very good, and I go home all grumpy, just thinking like, why am I bothering? This is the worst painting ever. In the past, if a painting wasn't going very well, I would just walk away. I just have to step away, because if it isn't working, if you force it, it's just going to make it worse. But now I've got better at kind of trusting the process and thinking, okay, I know this is just going through a stage here where it doesn't look very good. I've just got to keep going, keep going, keep going. And hopefully it does seem to work. It does seem to improve and get to the point that I'm trying to get to most of the time. The reason I love using oil paints is because of the boldness in the colours, the versatility, but mainly it's because of how forgiving they are. I find that I'm constantly making mistakes through my paintings. My process is to constantly be correcting myself. For that reason, I rely on the paint staying wet for as long as it can. I love that I can leave it, I can come back later that day and rework it. With watercolours, I find if you go wrong, that's it, and I couldn't handle that. So yeah, oil paints for me is just the fact that they're so forgiving is what I rely on. For all my paintings, I use just 5 colours. I use Prussian blue, yellow ochre, cadmium red, warm white, and Van Dyke brown. They are good for capturing that kind of Technicolor look that I try and achieve in my paintings. I didn't set out to use a limited palette. I used to use loads of colours. I just found over the years that I was slowly just using those 5, so I thought, well, that's what I'm going to stick with. I like to keep it simple if I can. The colour that I use the most is probably Van Dyke brown. I can use it straight out the tube. I use it to mix my blacks, so I can mix some of the Prussian blue with it. You get quite a cold black. You mix some Prussian blue and a little bit of red, you get quite a warm black. It's so versatile, and I use it all the time. If I'm trying to capture the light around someone's face. I did a painting recently where the light was catching the edge of someone's shirt, and I just use warm white straight out the tube. It's often the last colour that I'll use when I'm painting to get those highlights. So when the painting's finished, I'll just go back in and just go over the whole thing and just find all the points that just need drawing out slightly. The oil colours that I use are Michael Harding. And I was first introduced to them because I won a very small art competition, and the prize was a set of Michael Harding. I tried them and I love them, and I just thought I can't go back from that now. I keep it quite simple with the mediums that I use as well. I only use linseed oil, or recently I've been using Michael Harding's Artist Medium from their Miracle Medium range. And I use just a tiny, tiny dab of the medium, just the tiniest bit. I try and get the consistency of soft butter in my paint because I like it to flow nicely, and I like to keep that strength and the boldness in the colour. I work at all different sizes. I've done paintings this big, and I think the biggest painting that I've worked on was 8 foot across. I'm not actually very fine with the detail. I'm quite blocky and loose with the paint, so I prefer a bigger painting, a bigger canvas, where I can just try and capture all that detail in the way that I like to. I tend to stick to just one shape of brush. I use long flats, and I use them because I like that square shape to it, because it gives a nice chunky brush stroke. Or you turn it on its edge and you get some really fine lines. I'm really excited about a collaboration with Pro Arte brushes. I've been using Pro Arte for about, must be 10 years. And then they got in touch with me. I was straight in, where do I sign kind of thing, because I just love the brushes. And I noticed that they put my name on the brush, and they hadn't told me about this. But then I contacted Johnny from Pro Arte brushes, and they are launching a Will Rochfort line of brushes, and it kind of blew my mind, to be honest. It was a real honor. With the long flats, I'll go from about a size 0 to a size 6. So it's only from about this big up to about that big. So not huge brushes. But then for my very much finer detail, I've recently been using some riggers and some half riggers, which are, I think they're like sign writing brushes, the long bristles, and they're really, really nice to use. But again, I'm never trying to be too fine with it. I'm always getting quite a lot of paint on the brush and using that just to work over the canvas. Another aspect of my process is that when I'm working through a painting, I will work in sections. So rather than working on the painting as a whole and slowly build up the whole thing in layers, I will work on it in one section at a time. The length of time it takes me to do a painting depends on the painting itself. So it's anything from a few hours to about a month. I find that if I go over a month, I can start to lose interest, which isn't a good thing. So I try and keep it within that time. Sometimes it's difficult to know exactly how long a painting takes because I'm working on several paintings at the same time. And it's usually just because of deadlines. So it's with commissions and things like that. But I'm always sort of jumping around from one to the other. One thing I've got better at over the years is just knowing when to stop. Because I think it's quite easy to overwork a painting. When I'm painting a hand or a face, I'll do it as economically with the paint as I can, and then I stop. And it's just something that I've learned over the years, just with practice. My studio is my favourite place to be. I love it. It's not huge. Every single surface is full of all my props. My paints are on the walls. I've got paintings half finished on the walls. I've got shelves full of old typewriters and old TVs and actual real old cameras. I have a section at the back of the studio that I call the prop making department. I love it because I can kind of shut myself off and I can put on a podcast, and then I'm stood in front of the canvas and I'm ready to go. I think there's a relationship between my style of painting and the films that I like. And in one painting, I'm trying to show what happened before the scene, during the scene, and what's going to happen after the scene. I'm always trying to capture a narrative, always trying to capture a story. I sometimes see it as I'm giving the first page of a story, and then people who are looking at the painting can fill in the rest of the story for themselves. So I did a painting a few years ago, and it was of 3 women stood around a suitcase full of money, and that was it. And what I love about that is that it's such a simple image, but it conjures up so much. And when I finished the painting, and my wife and my friend and my sister posed for it, and I didn't say anything, all I called it was the meeting, so there was no clue to what I think the painting's about. And I put it out there and I said to people, what do you think this painting is of? And the responses were unbelievable. People thought the girls were all sisters, which I never indicated to. Some people thought they'd all divorced. Some people thought they'd all murdered their husbands. You know, it was just a whole different, the interpretations was amazing. But then on the other side of that, I did a painting a few years ago of a guy he's in a hotel room, he's a writer, and he's sat at his desk at his typewriter. Someone sent me a message saying they loved how I referenced Michelangelo's The Creation of Man in the pose that I'd created. And I just said, thank you very much. And I just left it at that. But it wasn't my intention at all, so I just got lucky there. When I was at Bournemouth Arts Institute doing a foundation course, I stumbled into a seminar about Norman Rockwell by accident. And it was kind of like being struck by lightning. I was like, well, whose is this work? He kind of ticked all the boxes for the themes and the subjects and the style of painting that I loved. And that was the reason I started oil painting, because I wanted to try and paint in his style and be inspired by him. As a storyteller, I think he was a master. You know, just in one painting, being able to tell a complete story. I've borrowed a lot from his approach. And when people say to me, what's the best way to learn painting? I always say, take the artists that you love and study their methods. Over the years, I've kind of left some things behind and moved on with other things and taken elements of his process and elaborated on them and kind of made it into my own thing. But I think I can't get away from it, and I'm not trying to. You can definitely see the Norman Rockwell influence is definitely there. I think my love of movies and cinema and filmmaking is so ingrained that I think it just comes out whether I realise it or not. The big one for me is Spielberg. It draws your eye in exactly the way that he wants it to around the scene, and that's what I try and do as well. I'm a big fan of Edgar Wright. I think his films, again, just from a storytelling point of view, I think he's so unusual and so different. David Fincher, he's so slick. Some of my biggest inspirations are film poster artists from days gone by. I get a lot of collectors in Hollywood and in California, and I think it's because even if a painting isn't specifically based on film, I think you can see it in my style of painting. Being an artist for a living is one of the best things you can do, one of the best ways to live your life, but it's not going to happen by itself. You know, you have to put a lot of work into it. You have to be as proactive as possible, get your work out there in as many ways as you can, take every painting job that comes your way. When I started out, I painted everything. I painted hundreds and hundreds of people's kids. You had to sort of swallow your artistic pride a little bit, but it meant that I was earning money from painting, and that's all that kind of mattered to me. I always say take every opportunity that you can, because you don't know what it will lead to, because I had something like that when I was still at university. I came home for summer. My mum was reading the local paper, and there was a tiny ad about this big, and it was for this thing called the New Forest Show, which is a big agricultural event that happens near where I grew up, and they were looking for artists who painted horses. You know, being a typical student, I said, "No, Mum, not interested. I don't paint horses." But she phoned the number anyway, and she said, "You have to see my son's work." So probably kind of reluctantly, I sent over my paintings to this lady, and she came back straight away and she said, "I love them." And so I took my paintings over to her. I was absolutely terrified. It's just 4 or 5 days, and I didn't sell anything, but I met Anne, and that was it. Then I said, "Thank you very much, goodbye" at the end of it, and that was that. 2 years later, I was still at uni, my final year, and my phone rang, and it was Anne. And she said she had just been put in charge of putting together a group of artists to tour the country in support of the upcoming 2012 Olympics, the London Olympics. And she said, "Would you like to be involved?" And I said, "Yes, please. Thank you very much." And so suddenly I found myself, before I'd even left uni, I was touring the country with my paintings. And it gave me exposure and experience and exhibitions I just would never have got otherwise. Closer to actually 2012, Anne phoned me again and said, "I've just opened a gallery at Terminal 5 at Heathrow Airport." And she said, "Would you like to be involved?" And I said, "Yes, please. Thank you very much." And so I was showing my work in this amazing gallery space. I can't overstate it how much being with that gallery kind of changed my life. All of that came from that tiny ad in the local paper that I nearly ignored. Basically, everything that I kind of have now, because it helped all of it so much, is basically all thanks to my mum. Someone, and it doesn't sound like much from the outside, but someone said to me, they said 3 words, they said, "Make it happen." It really struck a chord with me, because for me, I find that doing this for a living, it can be quite overwhelming. There's a lot to do, there's a lot to be, there's a lot to keep up with. I say that to myself, just make it happen. It kind of boils it down. You want that commission, or you want to work with that gallery, you want to work with that client, or you want to win that award, whatever it is, by just sort of simplifying it, just to say, make it happen. Do whatever you need to do, put those first steps into place to achieve the thing that you want to get. It might still be years down the line, but just make it happen. And that, when I was told that, I don't have any tattoos, but if I did, it would probably be that. It would just say, make it happen, just to always remind myself that. Just keep it simple, make it happen.